Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us. Hi, Ben. Hi, Bill, Chris, Alex, Jenna, Tim. It's wonderful to see you all. Excited to have you all here. So thank you so much for joining today. We are thrilled to have Rana join us this afternoon for a discussion with our core community. And thank you again to Natasha and Richard for leading that discussion. Wanted to just give a little overview of Underscore VC for those who do and that do not know us. We are very much a community-driven early stage venture capital firm. We back founders from seed to Series A and predominantly in the B2B SaaS space. And we have an emphasis on building here in Boston. What's unique about Underscore is that we recognize capital is a commodity to provide founders what they really need, which is a community of proven experts aligned to their unique needs. We call this community our Underscore core. And through the core, we're able to provide for founders with the right expertise from the right people at the right time. And this is all at zero cost to the founders and with reward for our core members. So quick house rules. Please use the Q&A box to ask any tech questions, partake in the conversations with attendees in the chat box, and then raise your hand during the Q&A segment and we'll call on you. I'm also excited to share that we have copies of Rana's book, Girl Decoded, to give away. The more active you are during the discussion, the greater chance to win a copy of the book. So now I'll pass it over to Natasha to start the conversation.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jenny. So it'll be a fun conversation today. I'll give you guys a quick intro of Rana. So Rana is a pioneer in emotion AI. She's the co-founder and CEO of Affectiva and is the author of a newly released book that we hinted before called Girl Decoded, a scientist's quest to reclaim our humanity by bringing emotional intelligence to technology. She's a passionate advocate for humanizing technology, ethics, and AI and diversity, and has been recognized on Fortune's 40 Under 40 list and as one of Forbes' top 50 women in tech. I could keep going, but I will pause there and welcome Rana to joining us, me and Richard.
Thank you for having me. Very excited to do this. And I love what Underscore is doing to bring the Boston community of founders and entrepreneurs together. Very, very excited to be part of this.
Awesome. And Richard, I don't know if you want to give yourself a quick intro. We'll be dividing and conquering this conversation today.
Sure, yeah, happy to. Hey everybody, I'm Richard Delude, one of the co-founders and partners of Underscore. As we got going about 6 years ago, the intent was to partner with some of the best entrepreneurs in the Boston ecosystem and beyond, and help companies get going from the earliest stages, seed, Series A and beyond. And now we are actively investing out of a $140 million second fund and are early in that and very looking forward to working with some of the best founders out there. And one that's always been on our radar was Rana, although she's a little bit further beyond us, having built a company of pretty sufficient scale, but really looking forward to the conversation today.
Amazing. So I guess there's going to be a lot of big conversations we're going to talk about D&I, ethics, and emotions. But Rana, I think the first place maybe we could start off is talking a little bit about your path to being a founder. What was kind of like your first aha moment where you were like, okay, entrepreneurship, tech, startups is a path for me, or a path in general?
Yeah, I'll say that being an entrepreneur was never on my radar. Like, it wasn't my dream. But I have an unusual path to how I ended up starting a company. I did my doctorate degree at Cambridge University, which is where I built the very first version of my technology, essentially understanding people's emotions by tracking their facial expressions. From then on, I joined MIT as a postdoc thinking, okay, like, you know, I'm on track to become faculty. And I was actually getting ready to submit my faculty application. But through MIT, it became clear that there was a lot of commercial interest in the technology. And so about 10 years ago, Ross Picard, who's an MIT professor and my co-founder, and I spun out Affectiva. The tipping point for me was just recognizing that this technology has so much potential. It has so much potential to transform many industries, and I wanted to be part of it. And so I kind of, you know, changed my dream, if you want, or evolved my dream and my goals to become an entrepreneur. And it's been a wild journey.
Yeah, I mean, what was it like pitching something that has to do with emotions to a room of investor is not to be crass, but I do wonder, like, what does that pitch look and sound and feel like?
So when we first spun out, which is again 10 years ago, Roz and I did the whole like Sandhill Roadshow, and Richard, I'm sure this will resonate with you. So we had a whole bunch of pitch, investor meetings lined up, and I just want you to picture this, right? Like two women scientists. This was our first company basically, and we were pitching an emotion company, and we avoided the word emotion like it was the plague. We used synonyms of it like affect, affectiva, valence, but we really didn't talk about emotions because we recognized it was so outside of the comfort zone of most of the investors we met with. And this is when it really hit me that we needed a lot more diversity in the investment community. And again, I love what Underscore is doing because you have a few female partners and you really value diversity, but it was not at all the case in our first pitches. And it's still true to today. I mean, we just raised, about 18 months ago, we raised a $26 million round of strategic and venture funding. And, it still looked kind of the same. This time around though, I really prioritized bringing funds that have a female partner, but also a person of color. So, that was important to us, and we were able to do that through Trend Forward and Motley Fool Ventures. Yeah. Richard, I know this is a topic that's really important to you as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and, I think the good part is, as a younger firm, we kind of have the benefit of, starting at the beginning. And, we always think a river is best crossed at the beginning. So, start with that, and then you're, going forward in a much better position. I think it applies for a lot of startups too. In fact, it's a thing we advise a lot of our companies to do very early on, to be, pretty forward thinking about it, and to wait not only for the perfect hire, but the perfect diverse hire too.
Yeah.
And for people who may not be familiar with what exactly your technology is, can you kind of break it down in a way that maybe a fourth grader would understand? It's the way I always get scientists to speak to me. So I would love for you to break it down for me.
Yeah, it's kind of actually really simple. So if you think about it, technology has a lot of IQ, like a lot of cognitive intelligence, but no emotional intelligence, no EQ. And any form of intelligence needs to have both working hand in hand, especially as AI becomes more mainstream and it starts to take on roles that were traditionally done by humans, like driving your car or assisting with your healthcare. We need technology to understand human, to know what people feel like, how they emote, how they express themselves, their activities, their behaviors. So we use computer vision and machine learning to build technology that can understand like your facial expressions or vocal intonations, gestures, and there's a whole slew of applications for it.
Got it. I mean, 10 years ago was when you started tackling the problem. So, I mean, how has the conversation changed in your head in terms of like just the appetite for that, and maybe not it feeling less of a dream or equally as much of a dream, or does it feel within reach for us?
Yeah, so I first started actually doing all this research 20 years ago with my PhD. That was even before, webcams were big and bulky and slow. And then 10 years ago, it still felt early because it was pre-smartphones. Now I feel like the market is so much more ready. We've got, smartphones and cameras are ubiquitous. Conversational interfaces like Alexa and Siri have become a lot more acceptable and ingrained again in our homes and our lives. So I feel like increasing, and I also, one more thing, I do feel that there's a techlash and people are really yearning to bring back humanity into technology, which is what we've been advocating for. So I really think that now's the time for our technology, and I'm excited about all the different areas of traction that we're getting in the market.
Yeah, I feel like there's so much trust to be made because so many times it's like, okay, let's bring humanity back into the fold. But to do that, we still need to trust tech in general. And this really interesting clash happens. I don't know, Richard, if that's something that you see on a day-to-day basis with the startups that are pitching to you or other portfolio companies. But I'm always so, I guess, yeah, I always take a step back and realize that all these things we want also require more trust than ever in a divisive time.
Absolutely. And, I think it's only exacerbated by a world where we all have to be zooming around, not just necessarily sitting, and doing a fireside chat. But in many ways, I think that opens up the aperture of the technology Rana and team are developing, and its importance to make sure that you're, listening universally around a room, whether it's, a real room or a virtual one.
One thing that is really kind of has been brought front and center with this pandemic, 90% of how people communicate is nonverbal. So it's a combination of your expressions and gestures and vocal intonations. Only 10% is in the choice of words we use. So a lot of that 90% is lost when we communicate in cyberspace. So now that we're all communicating virtually, I think there's an opportunity to bring in our technology to capture some of that nonverbal communication and make sure that it affects human-machine interactions, but also human-to-human communication, like when we're on social media and all of that. Like, I think there's going to be a lot of innovation coming out of this pandemic on the use of technology like ours. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about like how this intersects with the pandemic. Richard, I know you wanted to bring up kind of like the ethical side of AI, so I can pass on to you to maybe lead that part.
Sure. Yeah. I think this is one of the more nuanced and interesting pieces of any profound technology can be used in many different ways. And I think you're just starting to see the good and the bad that can come of this. And Rana, in my mind, is always on the good side. And, we appreciate that. But maybe an interesting place to start would be, where can it go wrong? And Rana, I'm sure you've had a lot of these discussions, whether with customers or otherwise. But I'd love to understand, what's the counterfactual? Like, how can this technology be used in the wrong way? And then I'd love to talk a little bit about how it can be used in the right way.
Okay. So we want to start with the wrong way first?
Yeah, let's do that.
Always more interesting.
Let's get that out of the way. We talk about the ethical development and the ethical deployment of AI, especially our AI, right? In the ethical development realm, a lot of things can go wrong, and most of it has to do with data and algorithmic bias. So you can imagine if the data is trained, for trying to build, a drowsiness classifier to install in cars, but this drowsiness classifier is trained on a very specific set of people, but now we expect it to work around the world because we work with global automakers. It won't work. If it's trained on people who look like you, Richard, and then it's supposed to then work on people like me and Natasha, it may not. So it's really important that we really think about the diversity of the data we use in the training and the validation of these algorithms. And it's a non-trivial exercise, and we as a company are really working hard on that, but it's not a solved problem yet. It's something we think a lot about and we prioritize, but we're really at the forefront of what's happening in the machine learning space at large. I don't know if you see that with your other portfolio companies.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think even in the discussion we had a little bit before this meeting, you talked about this really interesting example where you had a customer show up with a set of data, and you guys looked at this data and it didn't look quite right. So maybe you could tell me a little bit about that, and then how do you navigate that kind of a discussion with potential customers, somebody who's going to give you revenue and help keep everybody employed at the company?
Yeah, I think there's this interesting role that we find ourselves in, which is essentially evangelizing and educating the market, right? So we work with a lot of automotive makers. In one particular case, this was a German company, and they sent us a data set to evaluate. We took a look at the data set, and it was very, very, it was literally like, young-ish, blonde, blue-eyed white guys, right? And this is probably a representation of their team. So they were able to quickly collect that data set. And we took a look at it, and it was pretty easy for us to just process that data set, send them back the results, get paid, be done. But we kind of said, you know what, this is an opportunity to educate the market. This is not what, this is a global automaker. It's not representative of their drivers and their occupants. So we went back to them and we said, that's not good enough. We have an opportunity to collect a more diverse data set. Let's do that together. So we find ourselves in this role where we really have to educate the market and kind of raise the standards, raise the bar of what's acceptable, even though it's the harder path for us to take as a company, right? But I think it's the right path to take.
I think that's like a really interesting balance to the growth at all costs conversation that happens so often in Silicon Valley. Do you have any advice or insight on like how founders can draw that line for themselves? Like, where do you specifically get the TLDR on how responsible I need to be as a founder?
So when we first started Affectiva, Ross Picard, my co-founder, and I basically sat around her kitchen table, literally came up with these set of core values that we use to make decisions. And they play even a larger role when it's, when it's critical decisions for the company on what direction to take. So for instance, one of our core values is around respecting privacy and recognizing that this data is super personal and can be used to discriminate against people. So as a result, we said, okay, we're not going to engage in any industry where opt-in and consent isn't explicit, which meant that industries like security or surveillance or lie detection, even though we can probably make tons of money, we turn business away. And over the past 10 years, we routinely get inbound, either from, at one point we got an inbound from the venture arm of an intelligence agency, and they wanted to give us a lot of venture funding to pivot the company to focus on these applications, and we declined that. So I think it's really important to have these core values and use them as a North Star and make decisions based on them. Yeah.
Well, Rana, I think not many entrepreneurs are ever in the position where they get to decide whether they want to take revenue or not. How did you have those discussions with your board? And at the end of the day, I don't think all entrepreneurs would have, dealt with the customers in the same way, whether it's going back to the auto manufacturer and telling them, you have to change the state a little bit, or going to the board and saying, we're just not going to do these. And I know you have risk capital behind me to go, knock this down and put revenue on the board. How did you have those discussions? And then I think even more importantly is, why did you have those discussions? Why for you personally, in your own experience, do you say, this is the thing I need to champion and go do?
I think it goes back to why we started the company. So we're on this mission to humanize technology. And I really fundamentally believe that there are so many amazing use cases of this tech, be it, bringing data to mental health, making our roads safer, autism. There's just so many amazing use cases. And I felt that I wanted to spend, our team's mind share and our investors' money on some of these use cases that could advance that. I also think the role of investors is so important. Like, I feel like we've picked investors that share our core values and our mission and really believe in like our approach to doing things. So it was almost like, we're all on the same page. We're not going to do this business because it's not in line with what we do. And so I think what you're doing at Underscore, really prioritizing AI ethics is critical, because if investors don't put value on that, it's going to be hard for a startup to prioritize that, right? If I kept getting pressure from my investors to go in a certain direction, I feel that would have made it a lot harder. But thankfully, I feel like our investors are super aligned with kind of our roadmap and where we want to focus our energy.
One follow-up to that is, are there any, and I think an audience member actually asked this question too, so I'll just phrase it the way they did. When you look across tech, especially new tech, what are less obvious things that raise red flags for you? Asking from the standpoint of an early stage founder that might not even know that they're building bias into their tech. We'll save the Q&A for a little later, but I was going to ask that question anyways. Would love for you to get into that.
Do you want me to take a stat and then maybe Richard chimes in too?
Sure.
I feel like the number one thing to watch out for is to really ensure that your teams are diverse from the get-go, because it becomes harder and harder as you grow a team to diversify and make sure that you're inclusive. And it's critical with AI that we are diverse in terms of obviously gender and age and ethnicity, but even backgrounds and experiences, right? People who bring something different and a different point of view to the table. I think that's how we deal with each of our blind spots. So I would encourage, young companies and entrepreneurs and founders to really make that a priority from the get-go. Because once you start building bias into these systems, into these processes, and into the data, it's so hard to undo that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I fully agree. I think it can only ever be solved with a team that's around the table, both within the company and I also think outside of the company. So, I've often seen people build diverse kind of sounding boards or literally boards of advisors around them that can add this perspective. And I think the interesting part comes back to the blind spots and the inability to see it, right? So the example you talked about earlier, the auto manufacturer who had a bunch of data that looked like this, it looked like really good data until they get an outside perspective.
Right.
In fact, they probably would say they have one of the biggest corpus of great data out there that was fully labeled, but it may not necessarily be reflective of the world that they're doing markets and doing business in. So I think, to your point, the things that raise a lot of red flags are companies that don't necessarily think about this at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And I have to tell you, I've seen, companies take different paths on this one and hire another person who looks exactly the same, is generally the same because it's comfortable hire. And I got to tell you, I think categorically a lot of those have underperformed in my experience. And part of it's, I think, just because they're not necessarily bouncing the ideas around that could actually help harden a company or make the right decisions outside of, the small echo chamber that a lot of them can be. So.
Beyond kind of like data and hiring, are there any other like surprising places you think bias hides, Rana?
Interesting. I mean, I think it's kind of interesting because it can manifest, like it can be like there are explicit ways with which bias can manifest, but it can also manifest in like the everyday today decisions, even the small ones, right? In how, in how you lead a company or in how we connect and communicate with our partners. So I am a strong believer that innovation happens at the intersection of disciplines. We're a very interdisciplinary company by design because we bring kind of emotion science and marry that with machine learning and computer vision. And then we often have to become experts in industries like automotive or, media analytics. So I feel like innovation sits at the intersection of these like different Venn circles. And we have to be open to that and kind of acknowledge that we each come to it with our own a priori kind of data and experiences, and just be open to other ways of doing things. I mean, even in how we approach our machine learning pipeline, if you like data collection, annotation, training, validation, we often find ourselves wanting to take a step back and just rethink, have we built bias into even the way we approach the problem? So it's important to always just be open to other points of views.
I love that. And I think like your point on looking for a diverse room of investors feels another like a non-obvious way, maybe obvious, but to me sounds non-obvious as a way like you can build it into not just the things you see every day, but when you do have like an opportunity to step back, take that opportunity.
Can I add one more example? So when we were raising this most recent strategic round of investment, this particular automotive tier one supplier, they're called Aptiv, publicly traded, one of the leading automotive suppliers. They did a whole global search for technology like ours to invest in. And one of the top competitors was a Chinese company that had access to a ton of data, and they were a lot bigger than we are. But I think Aptiv ended up investing in us because we really we had high standards around privacy and around transparency and around opt-in and consent. All of this commitment to AI ethics, I felt that they really wanted a partner that prioritizes these things. So I feel like, again, if we continue to educate the market, the industry at large, and have companies and partners and even consumers vote with their feet in terms of which companies to partner with, I think as a whole will come out in a better spot. I don't know if you agree, Richard. You might say no.
No, it's good. You know, it's interesting. I think everyone, including founders, have to decide what's non-negotiable for them. And I think there's lots of reasons that I think people have things that are non-negotiable. And you took a very strong stance very early on security, privacy. Would love to understand, you know, where that originates from. Kind of like why did you end up on that side of the decision so clearly?
Yeah. For us, the very first application of the technology that we explored back at MIT was to help autistic kids communicate better, right? So the idea was, you know, we built like prototype of a Google Glass device, and the kids would use that device to really understand nonverbal signals, you know, as they communicated with family members or friends or colleagues. And so the thesis of the technology and the company from the get-go is about bridging a communication gap. Like, we want to help people connect better. And we felt that applications around security and surveillance, and we wanted to be the trusted partner for this data, right? Like, Natasha, to your point, a lot of this is built on trust. And we felt that if our brand became like a Big Brother brand, we would lose that trust, and that would preclude us from exploring all of these use cases that we're so passionate about. So lie detection is an example, right? Yes, our technology could potentially help in that space, but you're breaching this code, you know, this social contract that should be based on trust. So we made that decision early on, and now actually as leaders we have our annual summit, the Emotion AI Summit, where we bring ethicists and other industry leaders and scientists together, and we're trying to advocate for thoughtful regulation to really make sure that we're not deploying the technology in ways that can hurt, you know, minority groups or disenfranchise people. Yeah.
How much of like kind of your decision-making process do you think is also a result of the bandwidth? I know you mentioned you raised around 18 months ago, that comes with a certain level of ability. So I was wondering, like, yeah, talking about like maybe on day one and now how your bandwidth to be able to be strategic and thoughtful has changed or adapted or come to more fruition.
Great question, because I think there is this tension, right, between like being hunkered down, just doing your thing, like, you know, taking that extra like sales call or, you know, versus organizing something like a summit, which, you know, it often does end up in creating more partnerships and driving more revenue for the company, but that's not the main goal of the summit. The main goal of the summit is really to bring or create an ecosystem of thought leaders. And I mean, we invite our competitors. We really want it to be an industry event as opposed to an Affectiva event. And often, you know, Affectiva is not featured on stage. It's really not our, you know, it's hosted by us, organized by us, but it's really designed to be an industry event. And we wanted to do that because I mean, I don't know, I feel very strongly that we have a moral responsibility. I mean, we coined and created this industry category. We coined the term emotion AI. We've evangelized the use cases. I feel like we have a moral responsibility to drive it in the right direction. Yeah, so I feel like that's a big role, and on one way Affectiva can have impact beyond just driving revenue. One other example, we have an annual internship program where we bring in young people and kind of, it's very youth focused. This year we're doing it virtually. We have 53 trainees from different countries around the world, and it's a very kind of AI focused program. It's going to end up with a makeathon where they're going to explore the applications of AI in automotive and telehealth. So again, why do we do that? Like, it's not going to necessarily drive revenue for Affectiva. It's not, but it is a way for us to train and inspire the next generation of AI leaders and plant these ideas around ethics and diversity, So I see it as a way to maximize our impact.
Yeah, to plant seeds so people who thought that they couldn't do it can do it earlier than they probably imagined. You don't need to raise a Series B to start thinking about it.
Exactly.
Perfect. Well, I think we're going to be going to questions soon. Richard, I don't know if you wanted to wrap up with some questions on your end.
No, I think these are fantastic. And reading a few of the questions, maybe I could even start us off in that direction, and then we'll open it up to the floor more broadly. But there's some questions around use cases, right? When you get into emotion monitoring, there's actually a whole world of things that you could do with that. How do you prioritize that? And outside of prioritization, what's one or two examples that surprised you of, wow, I didn't even know we might be able to do that?
Yes. So what makes this super exciting, but also super challenging and frustrating, honestly, is that there are so many applications of this technology, and we get bombarded by people who want to use it for all sorts of applications, but we've had to prioritize as a company. So we're very focused on automotive as an application, like making, understanding driver impairment and drowsiness and fatigue and distraction, but also what else is happening inside the vehicle and personalizing the riding and transportation experience. So that's a really cool and kind of innovative application of the technology. We also quantify how people respond to online experiences. Like if you're watching a TV show or an online video, what's your emotional engagement with this content? Lots of applications there. One of the things that I'm very passionate about is the application of the technology to mental health. There are facial and vocal biomarkers of things like stress and depression and even suicidal intent. So I think that's an area where the company isn't really focused on this market, but there's huge potential, and where the technologies, the pieces or the building blocks for the solution are there, but we need to scale it. And so that's an opportunity. Surprising use cases. I mean, that's really maybe not that surprising, but it's really cool because it was started by a high school student. She got curious about Parkinson's and partnered with the Michael J. Fox Foundation when she was 15. Her name's Erin Smith. She now has a company and she's a student at Stanford trying to explore that. So I thought that was really cool, and it shows that innovation can come from anybody, really.
How much are you waiting for like legal regulation or certain things to change? And like how much of your time do you donate towards like the aspirational use cases and the business necessary use cases, and also turning away unethical use cases? It feels like there's probably a lot to have to balance and say yes and no to.
So we're involved with the partnership on AI. I think Gabby Zeiderveld, my chief marketing officer, she's on attending. So she and I tag team, and we're partners or members of the partnership on AI. And it's a consortium started by the big tech companies, as well as ACLU and Amnesty International, plus a number of startups. And we try to build guidelines around AI that is fair, accountable, transparent, ethical. And we're pushing for thoughtful regulation. Like, for example, we totally support the facial recognition ban that's been kind of advocated to be implemented in Boston, because we think that that's in line with our beliefs. So yeah, so we try to be at the forefront of that. Obviously, we can't just be doing that because we have our daily kind of business of building product and deploying product that we have to focus on. Yeah, so it's an interesting balance to.
Another audience question is, what companies are doing an awesome job in the space? We hear horror stories a lot, but who's not making the headlines but should be for their good work?
Ooh, that is an awesome question. Like in the space of emotion AI in particular, or like AI? That's a really good.
Let's look at ethical AI more generally. I think that's a broad.
Yeah, who's at the forefront of that? I mean, another company that's very much in our space is Cogito. They're also an MIT spin out. They focus on the vocal intonation. They're very focused on the call center market, but they also are very interested in mental health as well, and specifically depression. So I think that's an interesting one to look into.
Awesome. And for anyone listening right now, just a reminder that there's a Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom where you can post questions either with your name or anonymously, and me and Richard can divide and conquer answering them. Perfect. Should I hop to another question? Says, your book also reflects on decoding yourself, learning to express and act on your emotions. As part of that process, what was your biggest tactical takeaway for managing your own career and overcoming obstacles? Might that takeaway translate into a mantra? I think people want something so they can hold on to in this conversation.
You know, for me, that would have to be overcoming self-doubt. I had and still have I have that like Debbie Downer voice in my head that is always doubting what I can do and should do and can do. My favorite example of that is when we started Affectiva, Roz and I hired a CEO to run the company, and my role was Chief Technology and Science Officer. So I did that for a few years, and then Dave, our first CEO, decided to move on. So the question became, okay, who's going to be the next CEO? And a few people on our board said, Rana should be, you know, it's her baby, it's her technology, da, da, da. And I thought about it, and I was just too scared. I was like, I've never been CEO before. I don't want to fail. I don't want to fail the company. And so I didn't raise my hand. At the same time, our head of sales, who had also never been a CEO before, he said, sure, I'll take it on. Classic, right? So he became CEO for a couple of years. And to his credit, I mean, he did a great job in terms of ensuring that, you know, we extending our runway and kind of bringing a lot of financial frugality to the business. But at some point, I was coming back from speaking at a TED conference, and I realized I was doing the job. I actually went on Google and created a bulleted list of all the different functions of a CEO, like raising money, like, you know, setting the strategy and goals for the company, overseeing the R&D team, which is the core of our team. So anyways, I went to him and I said, hey, I want to be co-CEO. And he said, that's a really bad idea. Kept talking. And after a few conversations, I was like, I actually want to be the CEO. And so, which was so outside of my comfort zone, and it required a mental shift. You know, I had to convince myself first that I could be the CEO before I was able to convince him and then the board. It was so, like, once he and I took it to the board, it was a unanimous vote. But my key learning there is I was my own biggest obstacle. And
no, I love that.
Others is not to be that.
I love that. I just saw something on Twitter this morning that men apply for the job that women only apply for a job if they're 100% qualified. It's not the same for men at all. And so I think that'll definitely resonate with people. And I mean, I think also so often we hear like, yeah, like I wanted to start a company, I did, and I'm successful. So that is really refreshing to hear that there was a change that had to happen internally. Is there anything else you can tell about like different ways you've been able to find support through your journey? Has it been mentors? Has it been family, friends? I'm sure a mix of everything.
I think for me, the role of mentors was really important. So actually the CEO story, I had one mentor who kept saying, because I was like, I don't think I'll ever become CEO at my company. And he was like, no, visualize it, you can. So we would literally like sit down together and he would say, just imagine you're walking into the office as the CEO. And we did that a few times and I internalized it, right? Like I was able to actually visualize it and believe in it. So I think the role of mentors is really, really critical. People who will challenge you, but will also like rah-rah and champion you. And so I'm very grateful, you know, for my mentors, and I try to pay it forward. So I try to mentor, you know, and give back that way. I journal a lot. So I found that that's a great way to also just express my emotions openly. And then I'll say finally, just in the past few years, you know, primarily through writing the book, I've decided to become very vulnerable about my experience as an entrepreneur. I think people from the outside look at startups and entrepreneurs and see this glamorous life, right? And it's sometimes glamorous, but a lot of the times it's an emotional roller coaster. And I think it's so important that we talk about that openly, about the trade-offs you have to do as a founder. I mean, I'm a divorced mom of 2 kids, and I you know, I don't know if I do things differently, but I definitely spent a lot of time thinking about the company at the cost of my family. And I think we need to talk about these things. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you're up to it, I'd love to even learn a little bit more there. So if you had to pick one of the lowest points in the company today and one of the best points in the company today, since the founding, what were those two?
Well, I can tell you the lowest point. The lowest point was definitely at a time when, and again, I'm going to be very vulnerable there. So we had 2 technologies when we started. One was my technology, which was the facial emotion recognition engine, but we also had a hardware device, which was Ross Picard's baby, if you like. And so a few years in, we decided to unwind the hardware business. We didn't want to really be in the hardware business. Which, you know, so Roz kind of, you know, that was a moment of tension between Roz, my co-founder, and the company. It was also the time, and Roz is my role model and my mentor and my friend. So that created a lot of tension, and you know, we're still trying to rebuild that relationship. It was also the same year that I was going through a divorce and the same time that our first CEO left the company. So it felt like my entire support network had just like collapsed. It was really tough.
And what about the high?
I think the high point is just kind of in the last couple of years, I feel like we found, you know, there's a lot of interest in our technology. We're growing as a team. We raised that round. We still need to continue raising money, of course, but I feel like we've settled into our culture and our core values. We're recognized as leaders in this space. So yeah, I think that's kind of a high point.
And what still keeps you up at night as a entrepreneur, and then also as an entrepreneur who's stewarding a new technology to be ethical?
What keeps me up at night is always this question, you know, are we focused on the right market? Are we taking the right go-to-market strategy? We're B2B. There's always been we've always toyed with the idea of building a direct-to-consumer play with our technology. Like maybe it's a social app, it's a well-being or health monitoring app, or like emotion monitoring app. Maybe it's an emotion-enabled toaster, right? Like there's so many possibilities with this technology, but we've decided to be a B2B company. So I sometimes wonder if, you know, I wonder about that. If you know, somebody's gonna, you know, another company's just gonna take a very fresh approach to that and you know, and kind of leapfrog us. From an ethical kind of perspective, yeah, again, I just worry about the unintended consequences of this technology, and I just feel very responsible to try and advocate against that and uncover what these unintended consequences can be and might be, and just warn the world against them, you know.
Okay. Oh, you go, Natasha.
I was just going to do a quick follow-up from Eric, a listener. They mentioned that, are you hopeful that other companies will adopt and are adopting your ethical approach? Are you ahead of a trend, or do you feel like an outlier?
I honestly, I feel like in our ecosystem of emotion AI companies, like we've set a high bar, and I do feel like we're dragging, you know, not dragging, but we're like bringing the rest of the industry with us. So I know, you know, again, like in the automotive industry or market research, like companies now require opt-in and consent. They are thinking about diversity in the data, right? Because we keep evangelizing it. So I feel like we are bringing the whole industry up. So I wouldn't say like we're a total outlier, but there are of course companies, again, like the Chinese company I referenced, where it's not at all something that they prioritize or think about. So we have to grapple with that. Did I answer the question? Was there a second part?
No, I think you did a great job with answering the question.
There's actually a really interesting question in here as we think about not only diversity, but nuance of cultures. So some of the less observable things, the way people say things, the way they do them. Could you talk a little bit about how do you do cultural adaptations for, the technology? When you're in, I don't know, monitoring a Tokyo business call versus a Silicon Valley business call.
I actually think that's one of the really interesting applications given the pandemic and given how much business is now happening virtually, that there is an opportunity to quantify these in a business context. But we have so far, so we work with 25% of the global Fortune 500 companies, and we're deployed in 90 countries around the world. So we've got a very, very global and diverse data set. What we found so far is that by and large, facial expressions are universal, but there are cultural differences that depict when do people choose to amplify an expression or dampen it altogether. We've also found the gender kind of intersects with that as well. So like, for example, we looked at the positive or smile expressions across gender and culture. We found that women in the US smile 40% more than men do. In France and Germany, it's 25%. And in the UK, we found no statistically significant difference between men and women. Really interesting and fascinating. So it's important that we have this kind of cultural benchmarking when we look at the data. So we don't compare, a Japanese individual with a Brazilian individual, right? Whereas the kind of the reference lines might be quite different. So so we've got all these benchmarks because we have the scale to create that.
One follow-up to that, kind of a fun question in the chat was like, what features express emotion the most? Or yeah, just some ways that people, I guess, could nerd out about your technology.
Yeah. So there's like 43 facial muscles that depict our different expressions. And then these expressions, like for example, this is like action unit 12, the smile, this is action unit 4. So there's a lot of these. Just as an aside, we're able to now quantify 20 of them. So we still like we're halfway through. So there's a lot more work to be done. But basically these expressions combine to create thousands of different emotional and mental states. The lower half of the face is very expressive, obviously, but now we've been kind of really thinking through, okay, now if people are wearing masks, right, you can't see the lower half of the face, so we put a lot more emphasis on the eyes, which is also very, the eyes are the windows to the soul, they say. So there's a lot you can garner by looking at eyebrows and eye expressions as well.
And, there's some questions in here as well around both kind of the pre-hiring process. How do you really think about diversity, both in the pipeline that you're building as well as the process? And then after the fact, once they're as part of the organization, how do you align the company with the right incentives, the right designs in terms of, operating frameworks to really be successful in the D&I initiatives?
Yeah. I think from the recruiting standpoint, and again, like we acknowledge that we really think about this and it's really important and we're very passionate about it. It's one of the causes that we stand behind as a company, but our work's not done, right? Like a lot of people, I mean, as an example, I'm involved with Allraise, which I know one of your partners, Lily Lyman, is also involved with. And we support female founders and female investors, and that's something that we're very passionate about. I think it's important in the hiring process. First, even in the way you talk about the job can be quite alienating to particular groups of people, or how you articulate the requirements, for example. So we found that we have to be thoughtful about that. The interview experience, like when we bring people in and who we have them meet, like that's really critical too. If you don't want it to seem like a hostile, right, pretty homogeneous environment. So I that's another area where we spend a lot of time crafting that interview experience. And then post-hiring, diversity is one thing, and then inclusivity is another, right? It's great to be a diverse team, but you want to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. And so like we have this thing at Affectiva, for instance, if there's a couple of females in a meeting and one of us gets cut off by a fellow male team member, I will literally stop the meeting and say, hang on a second, Gabby, like what were you saying? Like, I really want to hear what you're saying. Or I'll give extra credit. I'll say, I really love Tanya's idea about like doing da 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 da. So amplifying each other's voices and making sure that we're all heard is important.
Yeah, I feel like amplification is one that I've been hearing more and really resonate with. How do you feel like you guys are doing on diversity as a company, especially with like the focus you're in, the field you care about, and being technical, so such a research and development heavy organization?
I think if you break it down, like, I honestly, like the honest answer is we are working on it. We're not where we would like to be. So for example, with, kind of the recent BLM conversations, we recognize that we can do better in terms of bringing Black people on board, and especially Black coders, right? Black female coders. And so we've started reaching out to communities that may not know about Affectiva. They wouldn't necessarily consider themselves as potential applicants. And we're just trying to reach out to communities that we wouldn't ordinarily draw from. Yeah, but we still have some work to do. Like I think every other tech company out there.
Kind of goes back to what you were saying of like you yourself needed to be told that you have to act like the CEO, and sometimes you need to extend and be proactive instead of reactive. So definitely fits in line with that. I think we only have a couple minutes left. I don't know if Richard, you want to finish us off with a couple last questions?
Yeah, definitely being conscious of time. There's definitely one question I want to ask, but I'll save that for last. And I guess as you think about this, and you studied emotion, the ability to quantify it, apply machine learning to it, where are the limits? Like at what point do you need a human in the loop? And then where, does that ever disappear? Do you think you'll have the perfect model at some point? Or, where will that line be drawn?
First of all, I'll say that like as an industry, I liken where we are at to a toddler, right? Like we're able to recognize like the basic expressions and emotions, but some of the more complex states, we're not there yet. And I think part of it is the data doesn't exist. So for instance, like what does pride look like? Or what does inspire, like when you watch a TED Talk and you're inspired, what does that face look like? We don't know, right? So there's a lot of, or pain, detecting, building an objective machine learning based face pain classifier instead of that, like on a scale from 1 to 10, like how much pain are you in? So I think we'll get there with a lot of these things. For me, the bigger kind of framework that I like to think about this is that this is not human versus AI or human versus machine. This is an opportunity for technology to augment and improve our EQ. So AI shouldn't just be about becoming more efficient or automating more or being more productive. It can also be about being more human. And I really envision this future where technology can augment our ability to be emotionally intelligent. Like that would be awesome, I think.
I know we bit through a lot, but someone was asking what strong resources can you point to in the space, places to learn, grow, and get considerate about ethical AI?
Ooh, there's a lot out there. Definitely check out Partnership on AI. It's a great resource. And there's a lot of white papers and a lot of conversations. The World Economic Forum also has kind of an AI council, if you like. And they're based in Silicon Valley. They have a whole office there. So that's interesting to check out. On the affective computing and the emotion AI side, there's a lot of resources, books like Roz's book. You can read my book. And then on the machine learning front, there's, again, a lot of material on Coursera and Udacity that's a great way to start.
And I'm sure some people will wonder the best way to get in touch with you if they're looking for a mentor or advice or a shoulder to get their board members to see why it's important to be ethical. What is the best way to get in touch with you or get on your radar?
I am very easy to find. I'm on all of the social media platforms. Do reach out. I love hearing from people, and yeah, look forward to connecting.
Sweet. Richard, I guess end us with that amazing last question, which I think I can guess, but would love for you to finish us off.
Well, in many ways, Ron already answered it, which was, as you look forward in the world and you guys are very successful, Affectiva has made the dent in the world that you wanted to, and the world has then changed. What does that look like to you?
Ooh. I think it just looks like a world with a lot more empathy in our human-machine interactions, and hopefully a lot more empathy in our human-to-human communications. So I'll keep hoping and working on it.
We'll support you in doing that. But thank you for joining us today. Really, really enjoyed the discussion. I know we also have some books that we'll be giving away to folks as well. And if you haven't read it, Girl Decoded is honestly a fantastic book. Some of my favorite parts were Rana 2.0, and I can't wait to see the follow-on, which will be Rana 3.0.
The next book. No.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining.
The community. Thank you so much. Thank you, Natasha. Thanks, everybody.
Great.
Bye.
All right. Thank you.